Hello, my name is Majabeen Syed, and this is my presentation on ICT and social media use in the 2015 Nepal earthquake. I've talked about this particular earthquake and disaster event a few times within this course, but I wanted to take an opportunity to be able to delve further into it within this final project and presentation. So to give a brief overview about it again, on April 25th, 2015, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck Nepal, followed by a 7.3 trembler 17 days later. It was the worst natural disaster to hit the country since the 8.0 magnitude earthquake that occurred in 1934. This quake killed close to 9,000, injured over 22,000, and collectively damaged or destroyed over 890,000 homes, leaving millions of people homeless and displaced. The inevitability of seismic activity in Nepal continues to leave massive devastation in its wake, and the 2015 disaster left reconstruction cost estimates at up to $9 billion. So here are a couple research questions that I had in mind as I was examining the articles. Information communication technologies, also known as ICTs, and social media played a major role in responding to the Nepal crisis, to bring attention to affected areas, as well as to bring in donations and much needed resources like bottled water. The two primary questions I wanted to think about were, how are ICTs and Web 2.0 tools used in the formal and informal health system response? And how do issues of technology accessibility and capability impact rural or low and middle income countries? In the literature review to find some of the results and go over the gaps in research I noticed, the main study I examined was use of information and communication technologies in the formal and informal health system responses to the 2015 Nepal earthquakes, in which the authors explored how ICTs were used during the crisis through interviews and focus group discussions with people who were affected by the disaster and those who were a part of the formal or informal health system response effort. To gain a broader perspective, the focus group consisted of women and men, young adults and older, healthcare workers in different sectors, and people of the Dalit caste. Data was also collected at 3 key locations, which I'll talk a bit about in the next slide. The research ultimately determined that the informal health system response made better use of ICTs and social media than the formal response did, even though regular civilians had more barriers. The gaps in research made apparent were a lack of literature on barriers to ICT use in low and middle income countries, as well as gaps in how formal health system responses elsewhere are reluctant to use ICTs to disseminate information, despite there being a significant amount of research and articles clearly indicating the benefits of using them during disasters. The primary method I applied to investigate the Nepal crisis was to compare literature in which ICTs and Web 2.0 tools, like social media, were used effectively during Nepal's disaster response and recovery to Olivia Crane and her team's research in which ICTs were scarcely utilized by Nepal's formal health system response. In the study examined in the research, in-depth interviews using a flexible interview guide and focus group discussions were conducted at each of the 3 locations: at the village level in Barpak, closest to the epicenter of the quake, at the district level in Gorkha, and at the central level in Kathmandu. Here are some of the results of the articles. The research ultimately determined that, as Palin has said before in a video that we watched for the course and has been referenced in many other articles, civilians are typically the first responders during a disaster. Another crucial revelation from this study can be summed up by this quote by an interviewee. Need expression, although vital, was clearly determined by a level of status and social capital, which I thought was really interesting because it means that the formal system was often bypassed by people, so they could reach out directly to their personal contacts instead, because they had determined the formal system to be inaccessible and unreliable. The formal health system response in the aftermath of the 2015 earthquake in Nepal likely could have been more effective than the informal response were ICT and Web 2.0 tools readily available and utilized. Barriers to ICT use in the informal response was prevalent due to the lack of many things, including access, capability, illiteracy, and a foreign online operating language. Access and capability proved to be barriers in the formal response as well. And additionally, fear of accountability and spreading misinformation further prevented those involved in the formal response from disseminating information and seeking external aid. The lack of technologically advanced healthcare offices contributes to the understanding that it may not be healthcare workers who are responsible, but the absence of financial resources to make these transitions. Based on these findings, both the formal and informal health system response would have been more effective in potentially saving lives by sending aid, food, providing shelter, and even crucial information. It is recommended that other studies of this kind be conducted and consulted to gain a broader understanding on the impact of ICTs and social media use during disasters, particularly in low and middle income countries since there is already a lack of information.